Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Verified Common Reviews. Today's movie review is Fantasy Island is a survival fantasy horror movie that aims to be a gripping horror movie from the very get go, revealing a woman being chased and kidnapped by a few masked individuals who work for someone called Mr. Rourke. Not the Pokemon gym leader, but just some regular guy called Mr. Rourke, who happens to be really rich. We witness the arrival of our group of protagonists on the so called Fantasy Island, where everyone is introduced. We have Melanie, the sassy protagonist, Gwen, the focused one, Patrick, who kind of falls into the maybe hero, maybe sidekick category, Brax and JD, who are the loud and obnoxious ones. This provides you a pretty good mix for choosing your own type of protagonist to follow, but personally, ever since Game of Thrones, I have always had my doubts on which character arc to follow. As they leave for their rooms, Melanie checks for cell coverage, which I know she just wants a way to upload her luxuries on social media, but it is also a great move to remember, especially if you're in a horror movie setting. On the beach hotel, we see Gwen being the first one amongst the group to notice something is wrong with the place, as she keeps feeling the presence of what feels like or what looks like a burnt man with black and red marks all over his body, and wherever this thing or apparition or person goes, a black liquid residue is found with some dripping water noises, which is kind of weird. This dude shows up all the time throughout the movie. Mr. Rourke, played by Michael Pena, introduces himself to the group and notifies them about the only two rules of the island. One fantasy per person, and two, you have to live through your fantasy no matter what the outcome is. So Brax and JD try to give out a few suggestions of what or how the fantasies might work, like for example intoxication or hallucination or illusion or something. But before they are able to come to a conclusion, their fantasy begins. They travel to the other side of the island with Mr. Rourke, where a super huge mansion with an extremely vibrant pool party awaits them. And I mean extremely vibrant pool party. Like very vibrant pool party. And they are suggested to enjoy the rest of the night. And they do so. They enjoy. A lot, I would say. Now that's a fantasy. The next in order is Gwen. Mr. Rourke initiates by getting some information about her past, and her personality, and then leads her through a door where her fantasy awaits. A night at a restaurant where her ex, Alan, proposed her but she denied, and wishes to go back and redo her life by saying yes this time. Mr. Rourke then leaves Gwen to enjoy her fantasy and escorts Melanie to her own, where she wishes to torture her high school bully, Sloane Madison. She is guided to a room where she finds Sloane Madison. Lol. She is guided to a room where she finds Madison, her bully, tied to a chair behind a one-way glass. I agree, she wants revenge, but this seems so wrong from the very start, and I know for some reason this is gonna be a game changer anytime soon. I mean, Saw, Hostel, Human Centipede, any other torture movie. Do I need to say more? And as I predicted, after a few fun gimmicks, things take a turn for the worse and go full on Hostel mode when Dr. Torture enters the room with his torture tools. And conveniently, Melanie has had a change of heart and wants to quit. So, by using the same torture techniques and torture machine, she helps Sloane to escape. And they later meet Damon, who is a guy who's just stranded on the island. He's a kind of a spy who is trying to uncover the truths of the fantasy island, or the truth of the fantasy island. So he helps them escape and kills Dr. Torture and leads them to a cave that reveals a crystal with magic dark liquid that grants anyone's fantasy, which is an illusion but has real life effects. So now we know the secret behind the dark liquid dripping every time a fantasy begins. It is this magic dark liquid. Next in line is Patrick. Patrick's fantasy was to meet his father one last time, because his father sacrificed himself for saving his squad during an army mission, and he indeed is reunited with his father, but he is visibly irritated from the very beginning when he comes to the realization that seeing his father again after 25 years or 27 years, one of those, was not really a great thing. And when he tells him about his death, his father tries to avoid it so he can go back home to his son, which Patrick tries to stop because he became what he is today with the concept of his father being a hero, and also the guilt of letting his squad die would weigh on his father forever, which is kind of true. And also, we don't really know if this is the past or the present or the future or just an illusion, and also changing past kind of consequences. Anyways, somewhere else, Gwen wakes up to an older Alan and apparently also has a daughter, which she has a really hard time believing because she doesn't really remember the past 5 years and her daughter, but comes to realization when Mr. Rourke explains his story of how he wished for his wife to come back from the dead and now she is alive and all good. But she can only stay with him if he doesn't leave the island, which was the second rule. This seems interesting. It is pretty much like 2019's The Room and a bit of 10 Cloverfield Lane, bringing the stay in, stay alive idea, kind of. But she realizes that it's wrong and asks for a redo. This time it is a building fire where a certain individual named Nick died who could have been easily saved. Putting others before herself? Well, that's nice, Gwen. But while living the fantasy, she notices JD and Brax running down the stairs and also Patrick as a cop in her fantasy. So basically all were related to each other via this fire incident. Or was this a fragment of Gwen's imagination, as she might have replaced people in her fantasy with ones she knows now? Really makes you wonder. With a failed attempt to save the guy, she is in trouble herself, trying to breathe and getting out of the fire and smoke and fighting death. But Julia, Mr. Rourke's assistant, saves her. So now we jump to Brax and JD's fantasy, where after the after party, out of the blue they are taken hostages by a group of assassins who turn out to be the real owners of the place and are kind of facing a fantasy situation of rescue missions. So now it's rescue missions from parties. They are saved by Patrick and his father, which reveals that they are on the same side of the island and in present, not in the past. So now maybe going back, I think he could have let his father live. JD is shot by one of the assassins and Patrick's father lets them escape by sacrificing himself. Well, okay, so no redos. While on the other side, Damon takes Dr. Torture down with him like a kamikaze and allows Melanie and Madison to escape. They call in a pilot in Damon's contact to help them escape, but it is shot down by the same assassins who seem to be dead before. So basically this dark magic liquid thing is unkillable, I suppose. They regroup and think over the incidents and come to a realization that this could be someone else's fantasy. The conclusion they come up to is that this fantasy could be Julia's fantasy, as Melanie remotely remembers Nick's mother, as Nick was Melanie's classmate, and could be a revenge fantasy, and that's why she saved Gwen so they could realize the big picture and could die altogether. Maybe? Well, Melanie's kind of twisted. They discuss about the crystal in the cave and plan to destroy it so the fantasies could end. So far, the movie had been really good and was on my watch list, but as soon as they enter the cave, they start disappearing into what looks like a face your fears and conquer your mind sort of thing. I hate these horror movie cliches, but also at the same time, Patrick is right behind Gwen and Brax. He is literally 1 inch away from them. How could he have not seen them disappear? Like, what is this? Are they blind? Like, is there fog in the cave? Is the cave making them blind? Is it taking the... I'm just gonna go on. I'm sorry. Let's come back to the point. While I was being let down by this sequence, here I saw an amazing plot twist. Melanie was the one who orchestrated this whole fantasy. Okay, I gotta admit, this is something I did not see coming. But looking back now, I see there were hidden clues. Madison was the only person in the fantasies. Others were pure, unreal hallucinations or imaginations or fragments of imaginations, and Melanie wasn't seen in Gwen's flashback fantasy as well. And while the movie hits you with this plot twist, you see Melanie stabbing Patrick in the guts. Well, looks like Patrick's gonna meet his father soon. So they gather near the crystal or the fountain or the gem or whatever that thing is. Melanie tells them that Nick was her boyfriend and hates them for being ignorant enough to save him when he could have been easily saved. So she decides to keep this fantasy going on, and Mr. Rourke has no choice but to support her, as it is the rule. Any fantasy is granted, no matter how horrible or how amusing it is. But, well, the plot demands changes, and the plot has to go on, and the good has to win over evil. So Mr. Rourke has a change of heart when he realizes that Julia, who is again, plot twist, his wife, is dying again, of the same causes that she keeps on dying apparently. He gives up on his role as the manager, and Madison drinks the fountain water to get her own fantasy of killing Melanie, because she was dragged and kidnapped. So she can technically get her own fantasy at this point. So she gets it by fantasizing of killing Melanie. And before you know, Nick pops out of the fountain and takes Melanie in with him. But surprise, surprise, Melanie is not dead. Melanie throws the grenade onto the group, and out of nowhere, Patrick the Ex Machina saves them by sacrificing himself, just like his father. And after a dip to white transition, they all wake up on the next day. And honestly, at this point, I was this close from losing my mind if I found out that this was all a dream. But thankfully, no, it was indeed all real, and it was the next day. So they planned to leave the island, with Brax staying behind, as that was his only way of being with JD, as the fantasy that they lived was JD's fantasy, not Brax's fantasy. So the fantasy island gave his fantasy of being with JD, even if it's a illusion. And that's all for this movie. Well, it is a great movie with a few dry spells in between. The only thing I was kinda salty about was how the movie's plot dealt with Melanie's death. I mean, she was bullied in high school. She had to do study from a home, she had to complete her high school from home, had a rough childhood probably, had one guy who loved him, and he gets burnt alive. And also, she dies in the end. I think it's a bit overkill for her. I mean, come on, have her locked up or something, but killed? She had a pretty rough time as well. Not being biased to her, she also tried to murder everyone, so maybe she deserves the death. I don't know, I just feel it was a bit too much for her. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. Please don't forget to like, share this video, comment your thoughts down below, and also subscribe to this channel for future video updates.